Today's the second day of the July-August 1985 7-day retreat. First, there are two announcements. Somebody left a note under my chair asking whether the chair was available for sitting here on it while I'm not there. Of course it is. If you want, you can also move it to where you're sitting. But please put it back so someone else can use it. There was also a note written by someone about people coming in noisily at 2:30 or some such time in the morning from late night sitting. One isn't usually aware how noisily one walks until one hears somebody else do it, and one wants to rest oneself. Maybe a good way to prevent noisy return to one's bedroom area from the sitting room is to walk very slowly, particularly at that time of the night or morning. And in that slowing down, set the foot down carefully, really so as not to disturb people who may have just fallen asleep. Also, please leave the bathroom doors open as a sign that the room is unoccupied. Don't close the bathroom door. I have no vacant and occupied signs on it. Having it open is the sign that the room is vacant. Today we will be talking, and hopefully not just talking about, but also looking at fear. So please, as was said yesterday before the talk, not just to follow what is said verbally, to understand the words and put them into memory, but to see what is being talked about in oneself, if this is possible. Fear is probably in every human being alive. He says some exceptional human beings who are not afraid, truly not afraid, not having repressed fear or having defense mechanisms, but not afraid, where fear is not a part of the consciousness or unconsciousness. But in most human beings, there's fear. And the crazy, absurd, incomprehensible behavior that we individually or as groups manifest usually arises out of fear or the escape from fear, or trying to repress fear. drown it out. Keep it in check. This holds for us as individual human beings and as collectives. Because the collective behavior of countries, nations, parties, political movements, and religions, churches, that is taking place throughout the world is the manifestation of what goes on in the individuals that make up those groups. And those individuals are us, ourselves, we. If one can already have an insight into this fact, it is a tremendous relief. It relieves division, a sense of division of the crazy world out there and how can I save myself from it. Can one save oneself? And what does saving mean? We don't use those words here. But to see, to begin to understand in this sitting or observation, in whatever posture it takes place, walking, relating, working, to observe so honestly, straightforwardly, one's behavior, one's thoughts and actions and gestures, so that the relationship becomes clear between what takes place in oneself and one's small little nuclear groups and associations and what takes place in the world at large, which is made up of individuals just like you and me. All of us, someplace, afraid. Harboring fear, fear being in that brain and physical organism. We'll talk in more detail about it. One may think that one is unique in one's fears, but one is not. All of us have grown up as little children, totally helpless, absolutely helpless, at the mercy of whoever was taking care of us at the time, which wasn't always mercy and love. Because those who took care of us were also afraid and acting mostly blindly out of fear, unconsciously, automatically, responding out of fear how one had been indoctrinated and taught and conditioned to respond. And that conditioning being passed on from generation to generation. Already little children are afraid. Afraid of punishment, of losing the love of their parents, of not being as good as the other, as talented, as good looking, having as many friends. There's fear of rejection, fear of loneliness, fear of pain. fear of failure in school. And already the image of oneself as somebody who should be doing something that one may not be able to do or will not do. And the fear of this image being hurt. Every little child has been hurt, no matter how kind and thoughtful and sensitive the parents. Every little child has been hurt, has been humiliated, maybe not by the parents, but by other children. Humiliation already going hand in hand with having an image of oneself. Because if there's no image of oneself, then there cannot be humiliation or hurt. I don't mean physical hurt. Physical hurt there can be, but not psychological hurt. That is something so vital for each of us to observe day in and day out as we do get hurt, get pissed off, whichever way we describe it. What is it that gets pissed off? Please observe it. If it's not observed, then it's an automatic reaction which breeds automatic pain and the desire for revenge in one way or other to get back for that. This also seems to be a universal mechanism in the human mind. To store up the memory of hurt, I'm just taking that part, and to get back to, as maybe a means, an assumed means of alleviating the hurt, but by doing it to someone else. Either the person who has inflicted the pain, or that person is too threatening, too dangerous to touch, then to get back at someone else. In the Old Testament, it's even written down as an advice. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It is sanctioned religiously. So, having been hurt as a little child, humiliated, it is not only committed to memory, but this memory can be triggered at any time by something that is reminiscent of the situation. May not be the same situation may never again occur, and yet anything that triggers the memory of that situation will also trigger the hurt. This is how our brain and nervous system is structured. It is an interconnected network. That something that is reminiscent or was in close time sequence to an incident that brought a hurt will trigger a remembrance of that, or something that remembers one of that will trigger this whole scene of hurt and the emotions, the desire for revenge, for relief, for escape at any one time. Actually, the hurt itself, the incident that produced the hurt, may not even be remembered, but only associated events or things that remind one. And that's why so often one says, I don't know why this makes me so fearful. I have not the slightest idea why this arouses fear in me. The brain is able to capsule off things that are too painful, and yet other connections are still existent and established. And they're alive. Something that reminds one of something can be associated again with something that reminds one of what reminds one of what reminds one of what originally happened. So can one understand, on whatever level, that what produces fear or hurt right now has nothing to do with this situation? In the rarest of cases, it has something to do with the past. The brain, by being able to produce a memory image or a memory idea of a dangerous situation, whether it's associated or the actual situation that took place, by producing in the memory the image or the idea of that dangerous situation, responds organismically with all that is needed for escape or attack, as the original situation did. In order to survive physical danger, there are elaborate triggering mechanisms originating in the brain to bring about great muscular energy, higher heartbeat, evacuation of the bowels to make the organism lighter for running, closing up of the stomach so one is not interested in food at the moment one has to run. All kind of very complex things are set up in the body to make it ready for flight at the moment that a danger is perceived. Originally, this was a survival mechanism to run away from the tiger once one has been hurt by him or has seen other people killed by tiger or some other wild animal, or to run away from a burning forest. The memory is there of what the burning forest means. One need not be burned twice. Brain produces the memory of it. And with that, all the organismic readiness to run. Or if running is impossible, if one is cornered by an animal, to fight. We've inherited that already from our animal past. And to run away from an animal, from a fire, from a threatening person, then this, what has been triggered and aroused in the organism, functions well. Everything that is triggered, the increased energies and juices are being used up in what this is for. But most of the time, the things that the memory produces are not real. They're imagined dangers, remembered hurts, to which the body responds just as to a real occurrence, and one is faced with this whole arousal in the body, which, if it isn't used to run or to fight, causes intense discomfort. It's unused stuff. Motion that wants to be used and is not used. Or the other, this feeling of paralyzed, that one knows, being paralyzed by fear. You're just out in the woods for a week before coming here, and there were lots of little rabbits. And the moment they spotted us, they just froze. It was incredible. They're sitting there like a statue, not moving one hair. Us animals were not neurotic. They were sitting it out. So maybe we have that kind of a response in our inherited repertoire too, to freeze. But it is in a situation in which one wants anything but freeze, it is felt as a tremendous burden, discomfort. And experiencing these aroused physical states as discomfort, as immediately a reaction against it, wanting to get rid of it, to fight it, or to just dislike it, which causes more physical manifestations, because every reaction, every thought that arises in the mind also has a physical accompaniment. That is something that can be observed by each one of us. It is not a doctrine put forth, it's something observable. One may say, my God, where did this feeling come from? The thought may have flitted through the mind so fast that one wasn't aware of it. But if there is attention, one can tell that one thought can trigger this whole fear apparatus and bring with it this intense discomfort, which one then what? Will react to again so that this chain keeps going. One can actually see or interpret this state that one finds oneself in, of a palpitating heart, shortness of breath, this excess of adrenaline, whatever it does. One can interpret that as a danger signal itself, be afraid of it, because one doesn't understand what brought it about and for what purpose it has been invoked. If one doesn't understand that and just interprets this sort of fragmentarily as a danger signal itself, then one will react again with fear against what has already been produced by fear. Get palpitations about palpitations. Seek out the doctor and then eventually maybe blame the doctor for treating one wrongly. We expect an incredible amount from our doctors of insight, which they don't have. Which they can't have often. Into what really brings about our symptoms. Because we're not aware of how we bring them up, what triggers them. Not there being an agent, but as it was described here, the situation. So let's get back to fear. This inherent possibility of thought, not just to serve as a valuable, necessary danger signal for a real danger, but to project a danger that does not exist, that is imagined in the future, to happen in the future, because this is what we're afraid of. Something happening in the future, based on what happened in the past. So thought not only creates the illusion of danger in the future, and therefore triggers our physical responses to it, but it also creates the future itself. Time. By projecting what happened in the past into what will happen to us, or may very likely happen. It's a creation of thought if one can see that when it happens, when one is caught up in one's frightening ideas, to see that this is the creation of thought, very real because of these mechanisms, that an imagined danger can trigger just the same fear reactions as a real danger. Not too long ago, once reflected upon all the possible dangers that I have, particularly in my younger years, imagined to come upon me and our family, living in an extremely dangerous environment, during a war, during persecutions, bombing attacks. And I don't think one incident of what was daily and nightly imagined to happen and fearfully responded to ever really happened. And yet, when something actually happened, the amazing thing was that then there was energy to deal with it. I have reported about it before, maybe not to this group, of the house having been hit by a firebomb. It was a corner house, not our corner, but the other corner. And the vitality to get the water up there, fire engines weren't anywhere around. It was not a big fire, it was a little fire. There was even a certain ecstasy in being part of this whole rescue operation. One didn't even call it like that. It was just something that absolutely needed to be done. It was so clear, and it was done, and there was no room for fear because there was action. Maybe because of this kind of ecstasy, there's such seeking out of dangerous situation by people who are so consumed with fear, joining the army, the Marines. To rather than always think of danger, to be in it and to act, to have this ability to act it out, which does not take care of the fear. It has nothing to do with resolving fear. Particularly after that bombing incident, the worst fears ever overcame one, imagining what could have happened and what will surely happen during the next attack. And constantly trembling inwardly. Stomach closed, never a real appetite, and etc. So faced with the discomfort that real or imagined fear brings about in the organism, one tries to do something about that. Not that one consciously sets about it. The brain is quite autonomous, finding ways to abate discomfort. One person, it just occurs to me, one person who once went to Sesshin long ago at a different place told me afterwards, quite a while afterwards, that he was so intensely afraid during that Sesshin, of whatever aspect, I don't remember, that he began during his daily 20-minute bath. At that time one could take a bath, didn't have a trickling shower here. He found himself creating a bath ritual where he put the soap, where the rag, at what sequence he did what, and tenaciously clung to that bath ritual. And he said it helped. That wasn't all clear at the time what was going on, but in retrospect he realized that this helped to abate direct touch with the fear and with what one actually was afraid of. That was all shoved underground by following this bath ritual. And maybe our fascination with religious and other rituals has such a fear-binding quality. A ritual rarely requires one to face fear. On the contrary, it promises to relief from it. Trust in some higher processes or beings that will take care of us if we perform the ritual carefully and regularly, devotedly. And fear remains undiscovered, unfaced, unresolved. There are so many different fears that we have, we couldn't possibly begin to list them all. But I think if one looks carefully, they all have to do with what one knows already could happen, namely what one has heard or experienced in the past, or has known that one's friends or relatives or other people throughout the world have experienced, and then projecting that into what one calls the future. That one may be out of a job, that one's husband or wife may leave one, one's children may die, or one's best friend may die, that one will fail, that one will be exposed for something one has done wrong. Tremendous fear of wrongdoing, connected very often with early threats of hell, punishment or hell. Just recently somebody told me that he did something which he had thought about carefully, thoroughly, as being the right thing to do, a necessary thing to do, and then 24 hours afterwards just fearing to burn in hell for that. Some religious retribution. So strong are these early indoctrinations. One says to see how careful, how responsible one has to be in how one talks to children, because it's so open, so impressionable. But of course it's used to keep them in line, to make them obey, to make them stop being such a nuisance. Here in retreat, sitting, delving into oneself or attending to what goes on. Maybe there are moments in which nothing goes on at all. No even feeling of self. And then so often is reported that with that comes a gripping anxiety, with this feeling of there being nothing. which if one examines it carefully, has to do with thought too, doesn't it? Because one has verbalized to oneself, there is nothing. Is there now nothing? Have I lost everything? These words can certainly trigger these fear responses that we've talked about, due to their association with what that means, having nothing, being abandoned, starving, all kind of associations. Another fear that people talk about is the fear of really seeing or of really hearing. That almost one tries to shelter oneself from that. From this total openness and vulnerability to what actually is. And there must be an idea in the mind that this is dangerous. Because what actually is not neither dangerous nor not dangerous, is what it is. It's ourselves, as we are. And we're not beset by thoughts and their effects upon the organism. There are fears of what will this sitting lead to? Will I get more thoughts? Some people say, since I've been sitting, there seem to be more thoughts. Before I came here, I didn't have that many. Which is an observation, but not quite correct. Because before one did not attend to it so carefully. Now one becomes aware of how many there are. Who knows, maybe there were more before. One can't tell because one was not attentive, very likely. Or maybe one has had a past experience of being overwhelmed by some past stuff gushing in from the unconscious mind. And now the fear, this is going to happen to me again. I must ward against this. Which is now the brain making ready for escape. Either by becoming involved in fantasies, or problem solving, or rituals. Why are we so afraid to face fear? Or to face, to plumb, to delve into what it is actually that we're afraid of. Because fear, if one observes that carefully, really carefully, the mind being given, attention being given to that, painstakingly, one will find that fear is already running away in one way or another. From what? Can one stick with that, remain with that, let it reveal itself, let it expose itself, be it what it may? Because it is quite clear if one looks at the way one lives and has lived and the way this whole world is moving, that not facing fear leads to war and destruction. This ecstasy of fighting each other. Getting into something real. By constantly building up armaments and the fear of these armaments being used. Somebody will want to really use them. Is dying to get in there. Into the fray. Supposed to be a movie out right now, Rambo or some name like that. I don't know if you've seen it, I've only heard newscasts about it, that even presidents have watched this movie and now know what to do about the terrorists. Let's get in there and annihilate them. This type of, all comes out of totally unfaced fear. And therefore projecting this evil conspiracy all around one. Let's do it in before it does us in. Here living in, I don't know how to even describe it. Imagination. Fantasy. Light years removed from the actuality of what one is afraid of. Is it one's own demise, death, not continuing as what one knows oneself to be and what one is attached to, namely an image or many images? Fear of not having a livelihood in this country's fairly unrealistic fear. Although there are people who are not properly fed, not housed, but very often, so I've heard, those people aren't as afraid of people who are affluent and have houses which may burn down or be burglarized. See, this is another response of fear, to attach oneself to something that one will hope will make one safe, that one tries to convince oneself or trust this will make me safe. But it doesn't. Because one has to now be afraid that what one is attached to may not last, may die, may be destroyed, may get lost. Or one may get used to it, and it doesn't do what it was supposed to do. So attachment, which is the creation of fear, doesn't resolve fear. It creates more of it. And yet that's what we're doing. Not facing fear or what we're afraid of, this nagging feeling of lack, insufficiency, helplessness, being nobody special. Trying to build a structure on top of that, attaching oneself to something, somebody, something, or something greater, in which one hopes to find refuge. But whatever is born out of fear has not resolved fear. The fear lingers on. Because the structure may collapse. At least one can be afraid of that. And one is. So, looking at all this, why is it so difficult to face fear? Or looking at this, does it appear much simpler to face fear and what one is afraid of? Not face to face, that's a dualistic way of putting it, but just being that. With a mind that doesn't seek a distraction from it, dulling itself, but aware. Facing means awareness. to every minute aspect of this fear and where it comes from, what its manifestations are. Loneliness, dying, and discerning carefully all what is thought. One cannot possibly know what death is. It's another thought, another scary thought. And the fact that thought can know it in itself makes it afraid. When thought can know something, it's afraid. And then one has to live in this fear created by a thought that can't know death, where death itself may be nothing fearful at all. There's only thought that makes it fearful. The idea of me not being there. Of me not continuing. This thought, do you see that? What does it really mean not to be there as me with all my memories? Which we just pointed out are associated with a lot of misery, a lot of past misery. What does it mean not to be there as me? As this bundle of past ideas and memories. Just because this bundle of memories and past ideas and images isn't there, doesn't mean life comes to an end. Actually, there's this bundle of past images, of memories that uses up like a dry and never fully absorbent sponge, uses up all life energy that manifests in this organism. Fears use up tremendous energies, and the escapes do too. One is exhausted at the end of the day, already in the middle, or maybe already when one wakes up. Because all of the energy bound in all these mechanisms to hold fear in abeyance and to attach. Can all this be viewed and looked at in one's daily life, not just on the sitting mat, but also when one goes home? Because one thing many people bring up in meetings is, it's not just fear that my thoughts are concerned with, but pleasure. And that I hate to give up. It's the same thought mechanism which can evoke fears, make them real so that the body responds with all its muscles and juices. The same mechanism can produce the image of a past pleasurable experience, and the body responds as though it was real. Imagining food, imagining sex, imagining whatever. The image is enough to arouse the body. And that is experienced as pleasurable. The others are experienced as discomforting, but it's the same thought process. don't have to necessarily go to the movies and rent our videos. We've got it right here. Although one tires of this, so one has to. Now one can rent videos for $1 or less. 99. In any drugstore, almost. It's amazing. Where does this stuff all come from? It makes jobs. Somebody with whom this was discussed in a meeting, just when one sees a thought that wants to invoke pleasure, when one sees that arising, not to go for it, which is not repression. Repression always happens unconsciously, automatically. It's too dangerous, but one isn't aware. Repression is automatic. But to see a thought arising which will invoke a most pleasurable incident to remember and to revel in, and to say no to that. The words make it look as though there is a conflict, but without conflict, without effort, just not to get involved in this. When we were talking about this in a meeting, a person said, well, why not? What's wrong with it? There's nothing right with it, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it is involved in memory, and not here. And why does one get involved in it? Is that to get away from something that was discomforting and beckons to be looked at, to be released, to be freed, to be seen? Is it to alleviate boredom? Boredom is also sort of a twilight zone. When one labels it, one has it already pegged and one knows it. But if one doesn't know it, rather than invoking pleasurable images to question, what is boredom? Let me just sit with this and see what it is. No expectations of it opening up into something blissful. And there's the same motive as in conjuring up a pleasurable thought. But because it's there right now. To be with everything when it's there because it's there. Because that is the reality and truth of the moment. And not now to come to the conclusion that invoking a pleasurable memory is the same thing as experiencing an intense joy in walking through the woods or being with another person. Actually, really, not in one's fantasy, but actually. It can be indescribable delight in perceiving what is within and without, outside, together or alone. And when that finishes, can that be completely finished, over with, done with? Or does it now become this memory which one will invoke in order not to be with an unpleasurable, discomforting moment, which is there to be lived through just as intensely and realistically as the moment of delight? Maybe then we don't establish these memory banks in the mind. They may be due to the fact that one has not completely been with the whole thing completely, from beginning to end and then done with it. Our memory banks in our mind may be all unfinished business. And therefore keeps intruding to be finished. And the way we go about finishing is to think some more about it. And thinking can never finish anything, it can only perpetuate. But being with something directly, not thinking about it, but being with it, feeling it, experiencing it, facing it, letting it expose itself, no matter how painful or pleasurable. That's not thought. And that can be the ending of something completely. Because when complete attention is given, there is no me there to harvest the results or to run away. That is the meaning of complete attention. No me to sway one way or the other. It's unconditional attention. At such a moment there is no past. There's no future. This tremendous, vast energy of life which surrounds one is also right here. Within one, if one can carefully put it this way. There's nobody there to have it, or to hold it, or apply it, or run away from it. It's whole, it's undivided. And therefore, no fear. Therefore, no fear. And when there's no fear, then there can really be love. Because there's no division. When there's no division, how could there be hatred? We will end here for today.